All right, so let's start talking about the rankings. Quick recap. So number 10 is a split. Yeah, I split it because I didn't feel like either of these teams. So just for a recap, I had Shopify Rebellion at 10th last week. This week I have Dignitas and Rebellion. Oh, you can't even see it. So I have Dignitas and Shopify Rebellion tied for 10th. I can't figure out where exactly to put these two teams. Shopify Rebellion get a top 8. They played FaZe okay in that series in the last regional, but they were extremely underwhelming considering you wanted to at least see them make a top 8 again. And this is kind of how I felt about this team, is I needed to see more. Like, okay, cool. You got that top 8. Do it again. And then they lose to Accelerate in 5. Accelerate is a team Shopify Rebellion needs to be beating if they want to be climbing up the rankings. You beat Ghosts, which is a team you should be beating. You lose to Space Station. Not great that you didn't take any games against Space Station. You beat Flashes of Brilliance, okay. And you didn't take any games against version 1. So in the hard matches that you had, you didn't beat one of the teams that you should have beat, and then you didn't play close enough to the teams that you have to punch up against. Overall disappointing performance for Shopify Rebellion. I wanted to see a better result from them. Dignitas, they're kind of in the same boat. I had Dignitas very close to Rebellion when I had them at 10th. They were my 11. But they lose to NRG, Optic, and version 1. They at least took version 1 to 5, and they took a game off of NRG and Optic. Then they swept both Accelerate and 26 Rising. So I felt it was enough to give them a mention in my power rankings. It was enough to at least put them on the same line as Shopify Rebellion. And if they have another day that's better than Rebellions like that, then they'll probably clear in a way just to be above Shopify Rebellion. But for right now, I have them tied at 10th. Number 9, I have Complexity. Last week I had Complexity at 8, so they drop a ranking. Complexity, they do make top 8 again. They beat Optic, they beat Gen G, they lose to FaZe, they beat version 1. That's a beautiful Swiss for Complexity. I thought that they were going to get out against Space Station, but then it went 7 and Complexity lost. I'm not going to harp on Complexity too hard for it. This is more so other teams and their performances that move them up more than I'm moving Complexity down. If NRG don't have the performance that they have, then Complexity probably stay right at 8 for me. So they played Space Station close, but it just wasn't enough. I don't think Complexity fall any farther than 9th. And this is probably a harsh ranking for them. When I think about it personally, I love this Complexity team. They have so much talent, and I think it's telling how strong the top 9 is when Complexity's at the bottom of it. They didn't make top 8 first time, so it's an improvement. So here, just another quick look. So this was my these were my rankings last week. So I had Energy at 9, Complexity at 8. And I had Optic at 5, I believe. Yeah, I had Optic at 5. So I'm not trying to be too punishing, depending on what your result is. But I'm also not trying to make like a 5-step swing, you know what I mean? But number 8 is going to be NRG. I explained this before I started putting the rankings down, that I wasn't too impressed with NRG's run overall. Beating Gen G is a quality win. The team who made 2 grand finals, obviously that's going to be a quality win, but you lose to Furia. You beat Rogue and Dignitas. Those are teams that NRG should be beating. You're not going to get many points for that. And they beat top 4 again and start getting some harder wins under their belt. Gen G was a good start. Optic is a decent win. It's not as good as a Gen G win, but it's a decent win. It's another top 8 team. They beat Optic. How are Optic going to be higher than them? Because I'm pretty sure if we go back, so Optic have 2 top 8s. NRG only have 1. No NRG across. Optic at least have made the top 8 both times. Yeah, they lose to Space Station in that last one, and then they lose to NRG this time. I just don't have a lot of faith in NRG. And Optic are kind of moving down the list quickly for me. But I had them at 5 last week, and I think moving them any lower than I did would have been overreacting. Now, maybe you could make the argument that 5 might have been too high for Optic initially. But after the first regional, I thought out of all the teams that finished in the top 8, they looked the best out of the Fall Open. Into the Fall Cup, I don't think that they looked the best out of the teams that fell or that lost in the top 8. I think that time that was Furia. But, or I guess between Fury and FaZe, between the teams that looked the best in the top 8. But I don't think that Optic, like I'm not going to move them down so far just yet. Which is why I have Optic at 7. So this is all, it's all kind of flowing into each other here. Like I said, if NRG get another solid result like that, then I will, put them up even farther. But I'm very resistive on NRG. I'm not convinced by their run, by their Swiss. The win over Optic is good. The win over Gen G is good. But again, I just wasn't impressed when I saw the win against version 1. But they still move 1 up. And I think that's totally fair, considering the results for NRG in the last however long. Last week, I had Furia at 6. This week, I have Furia at 6. I don't think Furia did anything to warrant me moving them up or down. I think they had the best results they could possibly get with the matches that they had in Swiss. It was such a clean Swiss run. You beat NRG, Space Station, and G2. NRG, a team I think Furia should be beating every time. Space Station, a team that they didn't beat in the last regional. They beat them this time. G2, a team that they failed against multiple times at LAN, and once last regional in the playoffs in 6 games. This time in Swiss, they beat them in 5, even though it was really close and it went to OT. It was such a massive win for Furia. And then they lost to version 1 in a really tight 7-game series. It's actually a really tough spot for Furia to make the major at this point. I think the only way they control their own destiny is if they win the Fall Invitational. It's not impossible. Definitely going to be pretty hard. And not something that is guaranteed by any stretch. But I don't think Furia did enough to move. I needed to see a top 4 out of Furia to move them up. And I don't think I got enough from them. Number 5. Last week, number 5, I had Optic. They moved down to 7. And at 5 this week is G2. G2 I had at number 2. I had at number 2. And then they don't make top 8. G2 gets slapped. They beat 26 Rising and they beat version 1. 2 great results, but then you lose to Furia, you lose to Space Station, you lose to Gen G. G2 typically own the matchup against Furia, and that's one that you want to see them take away. Space Station, that's another one that G2 have to find a way to win. And not winning against Gen G and not even making the top 8 after you made top 4 in the last regional, it's just not going to get it done. So G2, I mean, they put themselves in a tough spot now where they have to get, I think, minimum top 4 to be in position for the major. Furia win was only because JNAPs got demoed on ceiling. Okay. How else do you win a game of Rocket League? They also won the other games. What about the other games Furia won? You mean Furia are demoing now and that's why they're winning? Great. Then they should be moving up. That's how G2 won some of their games against Furia. I don't understand what you're trying to say. It seemed like a mental thing after the Furia loss. I was wondering about that because I hadn't tuned in until the last. I didn't tune in again because I was taking a break until the last game of Gen G. G2. I was surprised that they were in round 5. But yeah, G2, right at the end, I still expect them to make Rotterdam. But we'll see. Number 4. At number 4 last week, I had Gen G. And for version 1, I had them at 7th last week, but their performance this regional is enough for me to move them up to 4th. Not much more I can say about version 1 that I already have. Beating Furia, NRG, and Gen G, who have made both grand finals, is a really solid run for version 1. They lost to G2 and Complexity and the Swiss, but they beat Optic, they beat Rebellion, they beat Dignitas, and then they won the whole thing after how Gen G looked coming out of that coming out of both the FaZe and the Space Station series, where you could argue that version 1 had the easier side of the bracket. Although I would say Furia was probably version 1's toughest matchup. I think Gen G is a close second, but I actually think that Furia match was closer. No bias whatsoever. I debated putting version 1 up another place, but I felt like 3 places was the highest I was willing to move a team. Like three is typically the most I'm willing to swing a team within one tournament, unless the result is so pathetically bad that I just want to say something about it. And I don't really think Kaio needs to be replaced, guys. I think my favorite part about when Furia play are all the people who come out afterwards and tell me that Kaio needs to be replaced when Kaio is half the reason Furia did as well as they did. You understand that half the openings Furia had, 2 things Furia had to work on in this regional were smart touches and demos. Who do you think was focused on more demos? More than Yan, who was actually demoing a lot more. It was Kaio, who was coming up with soft touch or like smart touches as well. And Kaio was also excellent on defense. I'm tired of this nonsense about Kaio needing to be replaced. And I love after every time Furia lose a really close series that they were competitive in, like I see, when is Yan going to get on a better team? Nobody actually watches this team, and nobody actually knows how to like actually analyze some of these teams. Like people who say like version 1 need to replace Torment. Do you watch version 1 games? It just doesn't make sense to me. Like the amount of disrespect Kaio gets is unreal, and he doesn't deserve it. And I will admit that Kaio has absolutely been responsible for some of the woes that have happened to Furia in the past. But in this tournament, he was excellent. In this tournament, he was excellent. And I need y'all to actually watch what Kaio does on the field and how he handles the ball. Just because he's not twirly, whirly, flip, reset, double tap every single time doesn't mean he's not a quality slot-in player for his team. And doesn't mean that he's not doing a lot for them. Like Kaio was creating so much value off the ball. Off-ball play doesn't get any love. And Kaio's got so much in the vein of off-ball play. But that's my thoughts there. Version 1 on the uptick. We'll see if it continues for them. Last week, I had Space Station at 3. This week, I have Space Station at 3. They did enough against Complexity. They looked solid against Complexity. They had a Swiss run that, you know, you had a Swiss run you expect them to win. The Furia loss, I think, could have hurt their standing a bit. But you look at Furia's run, and they lost to the eventual regional champs. So really, it's not like the worst loss for Space Station. And they beat G2 as well. That was a good win. They beat Complexity in the playoffs to get it. That's two straight top 4s for Space Station. They get closed down pretty hard against Gen G. But Gen G are above Space Station for a reason now. But 2 top 4s and a lot of movement around Space Station kind of keep them in the 3 spot. I can totally see Space Station moving down from here if they don't get it figured out in the next regional. Do I think Furia had any obvious room for improvement against version 1, or was V1 popping off? I would actually say Furia did better than you might have expected them to, with how heavy the physical game was from version 1. Furia were getting outboxed early on in the series, and then they started punching back. And actually late in the series, it was Kaio specifically who I thought was part of the reason they were coming back. I I really just think it was beast mode peaking. Because Calm was being annoying, but Calm is always annoying. And he's always a facilitator. But the biggest difference was beast mode. Everything he touched was gold. Like, he could do no wrong, and it didn't seem to matter what they did to try to get him off the ball. He was always there. It was so close. I think it's a coin toss with that one. I think if you go back and you play that game 100 times, it's like 51-49 one way or the other. So I definitely credit the V1 popping off more than Furia having obvious room for improvement, personally. Our space station, the new phase? I don't know. For some reason, I'm just unconvinced by space station. Like, both of their semifinal performances were underwhelming, considering the firepower on that team. Number 2. And I'll put my number 2 and my number 1. Now, I know this is going to seem controversial, okay? I had Genji at 4 last week. I have Genji at 2, FaZe at 1. Okay? I moved Genji up 2. Did Genji beat FaZe in the quarterfinals? Yes, they did. It was very close. And I can't move FaZe from this top spot just yet. I can't move them from it just yet. The team that FaZe lose to go the whole way to Grands, but FaZe beat Genji last time as well. And Genji being a brand new roster, being at 4 last time. Genji haven't won. They get smacked by FaZe in the last Grands. Then version 1 slap up Genji in this Grands. I can't put Genji at number 1 without winning the regional. Maybe if it was another team I had at 1. You know, maybe. Like, maybe if I was... Because on Corelli's list, he had G2 number 1, FaZe number 2, right? I feel like Corelli has a harder time figuring out who his, like, top 3 are because of that. But I had FaZe at number 1, and I still think that they looked like the second best team here. Tough to say. I guess third best in this regional in terms of, like, results. But that Gen G series was so close. I think FaZe would have beat Space Station. And I don't know how FaZe version 1 would have gone. But I didn't see enough from, like, FaZe for me to put them down. Because I thought FaZe gave Gen G a lot of mix-ups. They played them super close. Apparently Jack versus First Killer was, to me, the story of that match. And Applejack won by just that much. It was really close. I would love to see Gen G jump the hump here on FaZe. But I got to see one more. I still think FaZe to me, FaZe is still the strongest team in NA. Like, if I had to pick a team, if I had to pick one team from North America to represent me internationally right now, it'd be FaZe. Despite FaZe going out in the quarterfinals, FaZe still are scoring the most goals per game by a wide margin. They're allowing the fewest goals per game. They allow the fewest shots against. And to me, this is the most impressive statistic right here. 6.41 shots allowed per game. To me, that's the most impressive, considering Psyonix gives you shots for sniffing at the goal. The fact that FaZe are preventing that many shots from being had means that they are literally controlling the game on defense, and teams against them don't have a lot of answers. You change to switching SSG and V1. Yeah, I think you can make an argument for switching places for a lot of teams. Like, I think you could make an argument for switching Optic and NRG. I think you can make an argument for switching V1 and SSG. And I even think, you know, if you're more bold in your power rankings, you can put Gen G above FaZe. But I'm using my last rankings to inform these rankings. So I can only move them so far. I moved 2 teams 3 spots I moved 2 teams 3 spots today. So that's a lot in my mind. But yeah, that's where I think NA is right now. It's really tight, and honestly, these rankings were pretty hard to try to stay consistent with.